The night my sister handed me a DNA test at my own birthday dinner, she didn't whisper it privately or slide it across the table like a guilty secret. She smirked at everyone, raised her glass, and said loud enough for the whole family to hear, "Maybe this will finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake." And the part that still haunts me isn't the insult, it's the way my mother laughed like it was funny. So why would my own sister want me to prove I didn't belong unless she was planning to use that truth to erase me completely? My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a financial analyst, the kind of job that teaches you to see patterns, to notice what people don't say, and to recognize danger long before it officially arrives. I built my life through discipline, because in my family, nothing was ever handed to me. Not praise, not warmth, not protection, and definitely not love. If you grew up as the child who always felt slightly out of place, even in your own home, you'll understand what I mean when I say this. I didn't just feel ignored, I felt uninvited. Like my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. Like the family story was written without me, and I was only allowed to stand in the background as proof that the family looked complete. And for most of my life, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was too sensitive. I told myself, this is just how families are. Some kids are closer, some kids get more attention. But deep down, I always knew the truth was sharper than that. My younger sister Lily was the sun in our household. She didn't have to do anything to be adored. She could spill a drink on the carpet and Mom would laugh and call it cute. She could forget a birthday and blame her schedule and Mom would say, "Oh honey, you're so busy." She could speak to me like I was a stranger in my own home. And somehow I was always the one expected to stay calm, stay polite, stay quiet. Meanwhile, I learned to become invisible. I learned to bring my own chair to the emotional table because no one ever pulled one out for me. Even as adults, nothing changed. Lily married young, had kids, built a life that my parents loved, showing off to their friends. I focused on my career, bought my own apartment, paid my own bills, and never asked for anything. Not because I didn't need help, because I knew better than to expect it. Then my father died. And I don't say that lightly. I don't mean passed away peacefully in his sleep in a way that makes the world feel gentle. I mean he died after months of sickness that drained the color from his face and the strength from his hands. The kind of illness that makes a man look at his own family and wonder if they'll protect him or pick him clean. The funeral was 3 months before my birthday, and those 3 months felt like a strange blur. Lily cried loudly in public, the way people do when they want witnesses. Mom acted like she was holding herself together, but there was something hollow in her. Like grief was something she performed, not something she lived. I stayed away. I told myself I was giving them space. But the truth is, I didn't feel welcome enough to come around. So when my mother called me and said, "Come over for a small birthday dinner, just us," I almost said no. But her voice was different. Too bright. Too casual. Like she was reading from a script someone else had written. And the weirdest part? She kept saying small and simple, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, staring at the calendar, thinking, why now? Why a birthday dinner? My birthdays were never important in that house. But I went anyway. Because some part of me, some stubborn, aching part of me, still wanted to believe that maybe Dad's death had changed something. Maybe losing him had softened them. Maybe for once, my presence would matter. On the drive to my parents' house, I kept replaying the past in my head. Not the dramatic moments, the small ones, the quiet ones. The year Lily got a car for her graduation and I got a card with $20 in it. The time I won an academic award and Mom said, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from Lily's baby photos. The countless family dinners where Lily talked and laughed and complained, and Mom leaned in like every word was precious, while I sat there chewing food that tasted like cardboard, waiting for someone to ask me a single question about my life. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The house looked the same as it always had. Clean, polished, perfect on the outside. and I should have recognized that as a warning. When I walked in, the first thing I heard was laughter. Not quiet laughter, not soft, tired laughter. Real laughter. I stepped into the kitchen and saw Mom and Lily sitting at the table with a glossy travel brochure spread out between them. They were pointing at pictures of beaches and spas, talking about resorts, sipping wine like it was a normal Tuesday. 3 months after we buried my father, I stood there with the bottle of wine I'd brought, feeling like I had entered the wrong house. Mom looked up and smiled too quickly. She stood, walked over, and kissed my cheek, except her body flinched just slightly before she did it, like she had to force herself to cross the distance. Lily didn't even stand. She just lifted her fingers in a lazy wave without looking away from the brochure. "Hey, Em," she said, like we were co-workers passing in a hallway. Something tightened in my chest. I set the wine on the counter and tried to ignore the brochure. Tried to ignore the way they were already planning vacations while my father's side of the closet still smelled like his cologne. Dinner started the way it always did. Mom served food. Lily talked. Mom laughed. Lily's phone buzzed and she showed Mom pictures of her kids. Mom cooed. Lily complained about her husband. Mom sympathized. Lily bragged about her promotion. Mom praised her like she'd just cured cancer. I tried to join in, but every time I spoke, Lily somehow redirected the conversation back to herself. It was like watching a magician. Smooth, effortless, practiced. At one point, I asked the question that had been sitting like a stone in my throat since the funeral. "So, has the will been read yet?" The fork in Mom's hand froze halfway to her mouth. The room went still for a fraction of a second, so small you could have missed it if you weren't trained to watch for micro-reactions. Mom swallowed. "We're just not ready yet, sweetheart." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're still grieving." Lily immediately leaned forward and said, "Oh my God, speaking of grief, you should have seen what my boss said today," and launched into a story so long and dramatic, it felt like a deliberate distraction. Mom's shoulders relaxed. They were coordinating. I watched them exchange glances throughout the meal. Quick, nervous, like they were having entire conversations without words. And the strangest part was Lily. Lily kept watching me. Not the normal way she watched people, judging, dismissive, bored. This was different. This was anticipation. Like she was waiting for something to happen. Like she was counting down. Mom drank more wine than I'd ever seen her drink. Her cheeks flushed. Her hands shook slightly when she poured another glass. And every time I tried to meet her eyes, she looked away. I had seen that look before. Not guilt exactly. Fear. Then, right as dessert was being cleared, Lily stood up and walked to the counter where a small, wrapped box sat waiting. I hadn't noticed it earlier. Maybe I didn't want to. She picked it up and held it like it was a trophy. "Well," she said, her voice bright and sugary, "we couldn't let your birthday pass without something special." She walked over and slid it across the table toward me. Mom's fingers tightened around her wine glass so hard her knuckles turned white. Lily's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Happy birthday, Emily," she said. "I thought this might finally answer some questions you've probably had your whole life." I stared at the box. I could feel the air in the room change. Like a storm was moving in. I forced a small smile. "What is it?" Lily leaned back in her chair, eyes glittering, and then she said it. Slowly, clearly, like she wanted the words to land. "Maybe this DNA test will finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake in this family." For a second, my brain refused to process it. Then I heard laughter. Mom's nervous giggle. Lily's smug chuckle. Even the sound of my own breath catching in my throat. The laughter wasn't warm. It wasn't family teasing. It was the sound people make when they believe someone else is about to be humiliated, and they don't care. I looked at my mother. Her smile was trembling. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't stop it. She didn't defend me. She didn't say, "That's enough." She just sat there like a woman watching a train wreck she'd helped schedule. I looked back at Lily, and in that moment, I saw it. Not humor. Not sisterly cruelty. Something else. Hunger. Like she'd been waiting years to say those words out loud. I didn't open the box right away. My hands stayed on my lap. I stared at the wrapping paper like it was a live wire. Because suddenly, everything I'd ever felt in that house made sense in a way that terrified me. If Lily was confident enough to say that in front of Mom, if Mom was scared enough to laugh instead of stopping her, then this wasn't a joke. This was a plan. And somehow, I was the last person to find out I'd been standing in the middle of it my entire life. I picked up the box slowly. I smiled, the way women are trained to smile when they're being hurt in public, small, controlled, polite. Wow, I said quietly. A DNA test. Lily tilted her head. Don't you want to know who you really are? I held her gaze. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I felt like the target. And I knew, deep in my bones, that if I didn't figure out what they were doing, they were going to bury me with the truth. So I took the box, and I decided that if they wanted a DNA test so badly, I would give them one. Just not the way they expected. And that was the first night my entire life began to change. I didn't open the box at the table. I carried it with me the entire drive home, resting on the passenger seat like something fragile and dangerous. The streetlights slid across the windshield in slow, pale stripes, and every few seconds I glanced at the gift, as if it might move on its own. Lily had wanted me to open it in front of them. That much was obvious. She wanted the moment, the humiliation, the laughter, the performance. She wanted to watch my face when I realized I was the family's punchline, in a joke I didn't understand. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. Not from sadness, not even from anger, though both were there, but from something colder. A kind of instinct I had learned in the corporate world when I sensed a deal was rigged, and everyone else at the table already knew the outcome. I locked the door behind me, set my keys down, and stood in the silence for a long moment. My apartment was small, clean, and quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like safety when you've spent your whole life living inside someone else's chaos. I turned on a lamp in the living room, poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and stared at the wrapped box on my coffee table. The paper was expensive, neatly folded. The bow was perfectly tied. Lily didn't wrap gifts like that. She barely wrapped anything at all. Which meant she had put effort into this. Planning, timing, presentation. She had rehearsed the line. I could still hear her voice, sweet, theatrical, dripping with fake concern. Maybe this DNA test will finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake. That sentence wasn't a joke. It was a weapon. And like every weapon, it had a target. Me. I sank onto the couch and forced myself to breathe slowly. I told myself to think like I always did at work. Separate emotion from information. Identify the facts. Evaluate the risks. Plan the next move. Fact 1. Lily wanted me to take the test. Fact 2. Mom was nervous, terrified, actually. Fact 3. They had delayed the will reading for 3 months, which made no sense. My father had been a meticulous man. He ran a company. He didn't leave loose ends. And fact 4. Lily was watching me that entire dinner like she was waiting for something to snap. I reached for the box. The wrapping paper made a soft tearing sound in the quiet room, far louder than it should have been. When I lifted the lid, the DNA kit sat inside like an accusation. Plastic, sterile, clinical. A little tube, a set of instructions, a prepaid envelope. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed once, sharp and humorless. It would have been so easy to crumble right there, to feel like the last 35 years had been a lie, to sink into the old familiar belief that something was wrong with me, that I had been born defective. But I was done doing that. If I was going to break, I would break later, privately, on my own terms. Right now, I needed answers. I carried the kit into my bedroom and set it on the dresser. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my closet, not to find clothes, to find the past. My childhood bedroom had been cleared out years ago, but I still had boxes in storage. Old notebooks, photos, little keepsakes that didn't matter enough for anyone else to throw away. When I was younger, I used to keep everything because I was terrified of being forgotten. Now I was grateful for it. I dragged 2 dusty boxes out from under my bed and started going through them. The first was full of school papers, straight A, report cards, certificates, awards, proof that I had always tried to earn my place. The second was mostly old photos. Family vacations, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. I paused on one photo of Lily blowing out candles while Mom and Dad leaned in close, smiling. Lily's face was lit up with joy. I was in the background, half out of frame, holding a paper plate. I didn't even remember being there. My throat tightened, but I pushed past it. I wasn't looking for pain. I was looking for evidence. And then I found it. A plain manila envelope tucked between two photo albums, already opened, its contents shoved back inside carelessly. It looked like something someone had been in a hurry to hide again. The edges were worn, and there was a faint dust outline around it like it had been moved recently. My pulse spiked. I pulled it out and sat on the floor with it in my lap. Inside was a photograph. Me as a baby. And I wasn't in my father's arms. I was being held by a man I had never seen before. He was young, maybe early 30s, dark hair, strong jaw, a face that looked familiar in a way that made my stomach drop, not because I recognized him, but because something in his eyes felt like mine. On the back of the photo, in my mother's handwriting, were two words: "Forgive me." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the kind of shock you see in movies, where people gasp dramatically and fall backward. It was quieter, like your brain goes blank, your body freezes, and the world becomes too sharp. My mother had written that. My mother had known. Of course she had known, but she had written it like a confession, like a plea, like a woman who had done something unforgivable and couldn't undo it. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and took pictures of everything: the front of the photograph, the back, the envelope, even the dust marks around it. I didn't know why yet, but I knew enough to understand one thing. If Lily and Mom were playing games with the truth, I needed receipts. I sat there on the floor for a long time, the photo in my hands, feeling like the ground beneath my life had shifted. Suddenly, my childhood made sense in a way that hurt. The way Dad never hugged me first. The way his affection always felt measured, careful, like he was holding himself back. The way Mom's love came with tension, like she was afraid to look too closely at me. The way Lily's cruelty wasn't random, it was personal, like she'd been waiting for permission to say what she already believed. I stood up and paced my apartment, my mind racing. If I wasn't Dad's biological daughter, then why had he kept me? And if Lily had known, why was she revealing it now? That question kept circling back like a predator. Because Lily didn't do anything without a reason. Not the Lily I grew up with. She was the kind of person who could cry on command, smile through insults, and make you feel guilty for being hurt. She didn't throw a grenade unless she was certain she wouldn't be the one bleeding. Which meant this DNA test wasn't about family. It was about something else. Money. Inheritance. Control. I looked at the kid again, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. Lily didn't just want me to take the test. She wanted me to take it publicly. She wanted me to confirm the result in a way she could use. She wanted documentation, proof, something undeniable that could be presented to a lawyer, a judge, a court. And then the delayed will reading suddenly didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like strategy. I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and started writing notes like I was preparing a case for work. Timeline. Dad dies. 3 months pass. No will reading. Mom calls me for a birthday dinner. Lily presents DNA test. Mom looks terrified. Lily looks thrilled. This wasn't a coincidence. This was choreography. My hands were still shaking when I finally picked up the DNA kit and read the instructions. It promised results in 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. Long enough for Lily to prepare something. Long enough for her to consult lawyers. Long enough for her to set up whatever narrative she planned to use. And then I remembered something else. The way Lily had said it. Not, maybe you're adopted. Not, maybe Dad isn't your father. She said, another man's mistake. That phrasing was too specific, too cruel, too rehearsed. It meant she already knew. Or at least she believed she did. And my mother's reaction confirmed it. My mother hadn't been surprised. She had been scared. I walked to my bedroom, took the photo from the envelope, and set it beside the DNA kit. Two pieces of the same puzzle. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, but underneath the fear, something else started to rise. Resolve. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to how my family treated me. I wasn't just swallowing it. I wasn't just trying to be good enough to be loved. I was seeing them clearly. And when you see a pattern clearly, you can break it. I sat down, opened the kit, and collected my sample. My hands were steady now. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I was done being powerless. I sealed the tube, signed the paperwork, and slid everything into the prepaid envelope. Before I mailed it, I took pictures of the kit, the barcode, the paperwork, every detail. Then I opened my phone and scrolled back through old messages from Lily. Years of casual cruelty disguised as jokes. Little comments about how I didn't look like Dad. How I was so serious. How I was different. I had brushed them off for years. Now they looked like breadcrumbs. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner in my mind. Lily's smile, Mom's trembling hands, the laughter, the way my father's empty chair at the table felt like a ghost watching all of it. And I thought about the man in the photograph. Who was he? Where had he gone? And why had my mother written "forgive me" like she was begging someone, maybe my father, maybe God, maybe me, to let her live with what she'd done? By morning, the sun was spilling through my curtains, and I felt strangely calm. The kind of calm you feel right before you walk into something you know will change your life forever. I put the DNA kit envelope into my bag and left for work. On my lunch break, I drove to the post office. I stood in line behind a man mailing a stack of wedding invitations and a woman shipping a birthday gift to her grandson. Ordinary people doing ordinary things, completely unaware that I was holding a small envelope that could detonate my entire identity. When it was my turn, I slid it across the counter. The clerk weighed it, slapped on a label, and dropped it into a bin without a second glance. Just like that, a piece of my future disappeared into the system. I walked back to my car, sat behind the wheel, and finally let myself breathe. I wasn't sending it because Lily wanted me to. I was sending it because I needed to know what she was trying to do. Because whatever trap she thought she was setting, I intended to find it first. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the anger and the old ache of being unwanted, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that my family would suddenly love me. Hope that for the first time, I might finally understand why they never did. The waiting was the worst part. Not because I was impatient, but because it gave my mind too much room to wander. Every day that passed after I mailed the DNA kit felt like a slow, deliberate countdown, like I'd pulled a pin from a grenade, and now all I could do was hold it and pray I was ready when it finally exploded. For the first week, nothing changed on the surface. I went to work. I sat in meetings. I ran numbers. I smiled at coworkers. I answered emails. I acted like my world hadn't tilted. But inside, I was watching everything. I watched my mother's phone calls grow more frequent. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask about my job or my life. She asked one question, over and over, in slightly different forms. Have you heard anything yet? Did they say when it would come? You're sure you sent it correctly, right? Her voice always carried the same forced brightness, like she was trying to sound casual. But I could hear the strain beneath it, the way her breath caught, when she thought I might say something unexpected. And Lily? Lily went silent. No texts. No sarcastic memes. No passive-aggressive, just checking in messages. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she'd crossed a line and realized it. That thought lasted about 2 minutes before reality slapped me back into place. Lily didn't feel embarrassment. Lily felt satisfaction. Her silence wasn't guilt. It was confidence. She was waiting for the results the way a person waits for a verdict they already know is coming. In the meantime, I kept doing what I always did when I felt powerless. I gathered information. I looked at the photograph I'd found so many times I could have drawn it from memory. The man's face, the angle of his smile, the way his hand supported my baby body with a gentleness that didn't look staged. He wasn't a stranger holding a random child for a photo. There was familiarity in his posture like he'd held me before. I tried everything I could think of. I scanned the image, adjusted the contrast, sharpened the edges. I even fed it into facial recognition software out of sheer desperation. It came back with nothing useful. The photo was too old, too grainy, too imperfect. But my instincts kept circling one question. If my mother had written, "Forgive me," who was she asking forgiveness from? My father? God? Or me? The second month was when the anxiety turned into something sharper. Suspicion. Because the more I replayed that birthday dinner, the more details surfaced that I'd been too stunned to process at the time. The travel brochure, the delayed will reading, the way Lily had brought up the DNA test like it was a planned punchline, the way my mother's hands had trembled as if she was holding herself together by sheer force. This wasn't a spontaneous cruelty. This was a move on a chessboard. And the scariest part was realizing I didn't even know what game we were playing. By the third week, I couldn't take it anymore. I started digging into the one thing I could control: my father's financial history. As a financial analyst, I knew how to follow money the way other people followed gossip. I pulled up public records, old business filings, articles about Carter Industries, anything that might show patterns, unusual transactions, partnerships, investors' names that appeared and disappeared at key moments. I expected nothing, but what I found made my stomach drop. 34 years ago, right around the time I was born, Carter Industries had been in serious trouble. It wasn't just struggling, it was on the edge of collapse. There was a brief mention in an archived business journal about a local investor stepping in with capital that saved the company from bankruptcy. The investor's name? Richard Hayes. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind racing. Because Richard Hayes wasn't just some minor businessman, he had been a major figure in commercial real estate in California throughout the 80s and 90s. The kind of man who didn't casually throw money at a failing manufacturing firm unless there was a reason. And now his name was showing up in my DNA match database. I could feel the pieces shifting into place in my mind, like puzzle parts finally finding their edges. If Richard Hayes was connected to me biologically, and he was connected to my father financially, then my existence wasn't just a secret, it was a transaction. That thought made me nauseous. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself there could be other explanations. Maybe he was an uncle, a cousin, a distant relative. Maybe the match was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. Nothing about this felt coincidental. 5 weeks after I mailed the kit, the email arrived. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of my lunch break. I was sitting at my desk with a salad I hadn't touched, scrolling through spreadsheets on my laptop, when my phone buzzed. DNA results available. My hands went cold. I stared at the notification for a full 10 seconds before tapping it, like I could delay the truth by refusing to look at it. Then the page loaded, and there it was. No biological relationship detected with the Carter family reference samples. The words sat on my screen like a verdict. I wasn't my father's daughter. Not by blood. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like ice breaking under pressure. My first thought wasn't even about my mother. It was about my father. Because suddenly, every moment of distance made sense. The way he always looked at me with something complicated in his eyes. Not hatred, not disgust, just restraint. Like he was holding himself back from fully stepping into the role everyone assumed was natural. He had known. He must have known. And the worst part? He had kept me anyway. Even if he never loved me the way he loved Lily, he had still kept me. He had still raised me. He had still paid for my education. He had still given me his last name. I didn't know whether that made me feel grateful or devastated. I scrolled down. The report listed a genetic match. Richard Hayes. Possible relationship. Father or close paternal relative. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything around me. The office noise faded. The hum of the air conditioner disappeared. It was like the world had narrowed to those two words. Richard Hayes. I stared at the name until it blurred. Then I did what I always did when I didn't know how to feel. I researched. I spent the rest of my lunch break on my phone, reading everything I could find. Richard Hayes had died 5 years ago. He had been wealthy, very wealthy, and according to multiple sources, he had no wife, no children, no immediate family, which meant if he was my father, he had died without ever acknowledging me. The thought hit me like a punch, not because I wanted money, because I wanted an answer. Because if he was my biological father, then somewhere in this story there was a man who had existed in the shadows of my life without my knowledge. A man my mother had written "Forgive me" about. A man who had saved my father's company and then disappeared. Why? Why would someone do that? And why would my sister want me to find out now? I sat there at my desk, the DNA report open on my phone, feeling like I was looking at the blueprint of my own existence. I wasn't a Carter. I was a Hayes. But I had lived as a Carter for 35 years. And now the question wasn't just, who am I? The question was, what does this change? Because Lily had made sure I saw it. She had delivered the kit like a gift, like a joke, like a trap. And if she had planned it, then she had planned what came next. I forced myself to take a breath. Then I did something that felt reckless but necessary. I took a screenshot of the results, and I sent it to our family group chat. Just one image, and one line of text beneath it. Anyone want to explain this? The message delivered instantly. 3 dots appeared under my mother's name almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, then vanished. I watched that typing bubble like it was a heartbeat. Lily didn't type at all. She didn't need to. Because within seconds, my phone started ringing. Mom. I stared at her name on the screen for a moment before answering. Her voice was thick with tears. Emily, please, please delete that. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Not even, let's talk. Just, delete it. Like the truth was an inconvenience she wanted swept under the rug. I held the phone tighter. Why? I asked quietly. She started talking fast, tripping over her words. How complicated it had been back then. How people made mistakes. How my father had forgiven her. How we had moved forward as a family. How some secrets were buried for good reasons. She cried harder. She begged. And in all of it, she never once said the words I had waited my whole life to hear. I'm sorry. Then Lily finally responded. Not with a call, with a text. 3 short lines. Well, now you know. I guess that changes things, doesn't it? You should have asked sooner. My blood ran cold. No shock, no confusion, no denial. Just satisfaction. She had expected this. She had wanted this. The DNA test wasn't a cruel joke. It was the first move in a game I still didn't understand. And now I knew the truth. I wasn't my father's biological daughter, but I had a feeling Lily didn't care about biology. She cared about what biology could do. And whatever she was planning, she believed she'd already won. Lily's message sat on my screen like a smirk I couldn't wipe away. Well, now you know. I guess that changes things, doesn't it? I read it over and over, waiting for the punchline to appear, waiting for some hint of sisterly concern to slip through. It never did. There was no, "Are you okay?" No, I didn't mean it. No apology for humiliating me at my own birthday dinner. Just satisfaction. And that was the moment I stopped telling myself this was about cruelty. Cruelty was just Lily's hobby. This was strategy. My mother kept calling, crying harder each time, begging me to delete the screenshot from the group chat, like the truth was something that could be erased with enough panic. She kept repeating the same phrases, as if she'd memorized them. It was complicated. Your father forgave me. We did what we thought was best. Please don't do this. Not once did she say, Emily, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Not once did she acknowledge that I had spent 35 years feeling like a stranger in my own home because of a secret she chose to keep. She didn't call me because she cared about me. She called me because she was afraid. And I didn't fully understand what she was afraid of until later. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the DNA results open on my laptop and the photograph of the unknown man propped against my coffee mug. I stared at his face until my eyes burned, trying to force recognition out of thin air. I kept thinking about the name the report had given me, Richard Hayes. I kept thinking about the article I'd found, how he'd saved Carter Industries when it was collapsing. And then I kept thinking about Lily. Why now? Lily had known something. She had to. You don't give someone a DNA kit as a joke unless you're already certain of the outcome. Lily wasn't impulsive. She was theatrical. She was calculated. She loved control too much to gamble on anything. So if she knew, how long had she known? And if she'd known for years, why wait until my birthday, 3 months after Dad's funeral, to make it public? The answer crept in slowly, like a shadow sliding across the floor. Because Dad was gone. And with him gone, the inheritance was on the table. I tried to stay calm. I tried to tell myself I was jumping to conclusions, but I had built my entire career on pattern recognition, on risk assessment, on spotting motives that other people missed because they were distracted by emotion. This wasn't emotion. This was money. The next morning, I called Lily, not because I wanted to argue, because I needed to hear her voice. I needed to listen for the cracks, the tells, the moments where her mask slipped. I needed to know what game she thought she was playing. She answered on the third ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Well," she said brightly, "look who finally decided to talk." My jaw tightened. "Why did you do it, Lily?" She laughed softly. "Do what?" "You know exactly what. The DNA test, the dinner, the way you said it. You wanted everyone to hear." There was a pause just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Then she sighed dramatically, like I was exhausting her. "Oh, Emily, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke." "A joke?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You called me another man's mistake." "Well," she said, her tone turning syrupy. "Was I wrong?" The cruelty in her voice was familiar, but this time it didn't hit me the same way. This time it felt like watching a snake bare its fangs. It wasn't personal emotion. It was instinct. I forced myself to breathe. "You knew." Another pause. Then Lily's voice shifted barely, but enough. "I've known for a long time," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "How long?" And then, like she couldn't help herself, like she'd been waiting years to say it out loud, she snapped. "Since I was 16, okay?" she hissed. 16. While you were walking around acting like some tragic little princess who never understood why nobody liked her. I went cold. 16. That meant nearly 20 years. 20 years of Lily carrying this secret like a loaded gun. 20 years of watching me struggle, watching me try, watching me beg for scraps of affection, and never once showing a hint of empathy. I gripped my phone so hard my fingers hurt. "So you've known since you were a teenager, and you waited until now to humiliate me?" Lily's laugh this time wasn't playful. It was bitter. "Humiliate you," she repeated. "Emily, you have no idea what you've been doing to this family." I blinked. "What I've been doing?" "Yes," she snapped. "You've been the reason Mom has lived in fear for 2 decades. You've been the reason Dad had to pretend. You've been the reason everything was always tense. And you got to sit there and play the innocent victim while I had to carry the secret." The audacity of it stole my breath. "You carried it?" I whispered. "You mean you used it?" Her breathing turned harsh. And then, her mask finally shattered. "I protected this family's secrets for 20 years, she screamed. 20 years of keeping my mouth shut, while Mom spoiled you with her guilt, and Dad tried to act like you mattered." I almost laughed, because the reality was so twisted it bordered on absurd. Mom spoiled me? Dad acted like I mattered? If that was Lily's version of favoritism, then she lived in a world completely detached from reality. But in her rage, she revealed something that made my blood run cold. "And now," she said, her voice shaking with fury, "I'm going to make sure the right people get what they deserve." The line went dead. She hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. The right people get what they deserve. That wasn't about truth. That was about inheritance. And suddenly, everything snapped into focus, with terrifying clarity. Lily wasn't exposing the secret because she wanted to hurt me. She was exposing it because she believed it would disqualify me. She wanted me out of the will, out of the estate, out of Carter Industries, out of the family name. She wanted me erased. Legally. And the worst part? She thought she had the perfect weapon. Dinah. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying her words. Since I was 16, I protected the secret. The right people get what they deserve. And then, in the early hours of the morning, another thought hit me, one that made my stomach twist. If Lily had known since she was 16, that meant my mother had been living under her control for 20 years. Because Lily was the kind of person who didn't keep secrets out of loyalty. She kept secrets for leverage. I thought back to my entire adulthood, the way Mom always sided with Lily, the way money flowed toward her, the way Lily's mistakes were forgiven instantly, the way she got loans and help and support, while I got lectures about independence. I had always assumed Mom loved her more. But what if Mom wasn't choosing Lily out of love? What if she was choosing Lily out of fear? The next few days, I started asking questions. Carefully. Not directly, not in a way that would raise alarms. I reached out to people who had known my parents for decades, family, friends, neighbors, old coworkers from Carter Industries. I framed it as grief, as confusion, as trying to understand Dad's final wishes. And the things I heard made my skin crawl. One of Mom's closest friends mentioned, almost casually, that Lily had been talking about inheritance lawyers months ago before Dad had even gotten sick. Another said Lily had been weirdly confident about upcoming changes in the family, like she knew something was coming. Someone else recalled Lily complaining that Dad was too stubborn and needed to be reminded who the real family was. It was all hearsay, nothing I could take to court. But it was enough to confirm what my instincts had been screaming. Lily had been planning this, and she had been planning it for a long time. The more I learned, the more I realized I couldn't afford to handle this emotionally. I needed to handle it professionally. So I did something I had never done before. I hired an attorney, not a family friend, not someone who played golf with my father, not someone my mother could call behind my back. I found an independent estate lawyer, with a reputation for protecting clients in ugly inheritance battles. Her name was Sarah Chen. When I sat in her office, I felt strange, like I was betraying my own family just by seeking legal advice. The old conditioning ran deep: be polite, don't make waves, don't embarrass the family. But then I remembered Lily's smirk at my birthday dinner. I remembered my mother's nervous laughter. And I remembered the photograph with "Forgive me" written on the back. My family had been betraying me for 35 years. I was just finally waking up. Sarah listened as I explained everything: the DNA test, the results, the Hayes connection, Lily's words, the delayed will reading. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just took notes, calm and precise, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. When I finished, she leaned back and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Emily," she said quietly, "I want you to assume they've already hired counsel. And I want you to assume they've been preparing for this longer than you think." I swallowed. "You think they're trying to cut me out?" "I think," she said carefully, "that your sister is trying to control the narrative, and the moment money is involved, families become creative." Creative. That was a polite word for ruthless. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I recognized instantly. Mr. Harrison. My father's attorney. The man who had handled Carter family legal affairs for over 30 years. His voice was formal, but there was something else beneath it. Something almost heavy. "Emily," he said, "there are things your father wanted you to know. Things he instructed me to share only under specific circumstances." My heart thudded. What circumstances? There was a pause. Then he said, "Those circumstances have now been met." I felt my mouth go dry. "It's time," he continued, "for the will reading, and I strongly suggest you come prepared for what you're going to hear." I looked around my apartment, at the DNA results still open on my laptop, at the photograph of the man I'd never met, at the envelope with my mother's handwriting. Prepared. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into my family's world blind. I had a lawyer. I had evidence. I had instincts sharpened by years of surviving them. And I had one clear understanding now. Lily didn't give me that DNA test to reveal the truth. She gave it to bury me with it. But if she thought I was going to show up to that will reading alone, confused and ashamed, She was about to learn something she'd never bothered to learn in 35 years. I wasn't the weak one in this family. I was the one who had been surviving without love. And people like me don't break easily. Not anymore. The week leading up to the will reading felt like I was walking around with a storm cloud strapped to my back. On the outside, I kept my life normal. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat in meetings and nodded at the right moments. I even smiled when people made jokes in the break room, like my entire identity wasn't hanging by a thread. But inside, I was counting down. Every night, I replayed Lily's voice in my head. The right people will get what they deserve. She had said it like a promise. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something that made my skin crawl. Lily wasn't just hoping the will would go her way. She was certain it would. Certainty like that doesn't come from confidence alone. It comes from preparation. It comes from having information you believe no one else has. Or from believing the man who wrote the will never anticipated being challenged. But my father anticipated everything. He was the kind of man who locked doors even when he was home. The kind of businessman who read every contract twice and circled suspicious phrases in red ink. He didn't trust easily. And he didn't leave his legacy unprotected. Which meant if Lily thought she was about to walk into that lawyer's office and claim the estate by force, either she had underestimated him, or she knew something I didn't. That uncertainty gnawed at me, so I leaned harder into the only thing that made me feel steady: preparation. Sarah Chen met me twice that week. She had a calm, grounded energy that made me feel like I wasn't losing my mind. She didn't talk like a TV lawyer. She didn't make dramatic promises. She asked sharp questions and treated my family like what they were potential adversaries. "What do you want?" she asked me during our second meeting. The question caught me off guard. "I want to not be blindsided," I said honestly. Sarah nodded. "Good, because that's realistic." Then she slid a notepad across the table. "Your sister wants you emotional," she said. "If she can get you angry, ashamed, defensive, she can control the room. Your job is to stay quiet and watch. Let them reveal themselves." I swallowed. What if the will really does cut me out? Sarah didn't flinch. "Then we deal with it. But I don't want you walking in alone." That sentence hit me harder than it should have. Because I had been walking into family rooms alone my entire life. Alone at dinner tables where no one asked about my day. Alone at holidays where my gifts were an afterthought. Alone at conversations where Lily's voice drowned mine out. I wasn't used to anyone standing beside me. And yet, that was exactly what Sarah was doing. 2 days before the meeting, my mother called again. Her voice sounded thinner than usual, like she hadn't slept. "Emily," she said softly, "please, can we talk? Just you and me." I almost said yes. Not because I trusted her, but because there was a small, foolish part of me that still wanted her to choose me for once, still wanted her to say the words she'd never said. But Sarah's voice echoed in my head. "Your sister wants you emotional." And my mother had been emotional for 35 years. Emotional when it benefited her. Emotional when it kept the peace. Emotional when it avoided accountability. So I kept my voice steady. "We can talk after the will reading," I said. There was a pause, and then I heard her inhale sharply, like she was holding back a sob. "I'm scared," she whispered. That word almost cracked me. Not because I felt sorry for her, though I did, in a distant way, but because it confirmed everything. She wasn't scared of grief. She was scared of consequences. "I'll see you there," I said, and ended the call before I could change my mind. The morning of the will reading, I woke up before my alarm. My stomach felt hollow, like I'd swallowed ice water. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and stared at my own face for a long moment. I looked tired, older than 35. Like someone who had carried too much for too long. I put on a simple black dress, not morning black, but professional black. Clean lines. No jewelry except my watch. Hair pulled back. The kind of outfit that said, "I'm not here to beg." Sarah arrived at my apartment 10 minutes early. She didn't bring a briefcase full of dramatic documents. She brought a slim folder and a calm expression. "You ready?" she asked. As ready as I can be, I said. She nodded. Remember, let them talk. The drive downtown was quiet. The city moved around us like nothing important was happening. People crossed streets with coffee cups. Buses hissed at stops. A man jogged past with headphones in, completely unaware that my life was about to be rewritten in a conference room on the top floor of a law office. Harrison and Associates occupied an entire floor in a building that had stood for generations. The lobby smelled like polished wood and old money. The receptionist greeted us politely, like this was just another appointment. I signed in. My name looked strange on the page. Emily Carter. Was I still a Carter? Did I ever truly belong to that name? Sarah placed a hand lightly on my back as we were led to the conference room. It was a small gesture, but it steadied me more than I expected. The room was already set up. A long table, leather chairs, a pitcher of water untouched, a thick folder placed at the center like an offering. I chose a seat near the window, away from the head of the table. Sarah sat beside me, angled slightly toward the door so she could see anyone who entered. We waited, and for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt something close to control. My mother arrived first. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the past month. Her face was pale, her lipstick was smeared slightly, like she'd applied it with shaking hands. She clutched her purse so tightly her fingers looked stiff. When she saw me, her eyes widened. Not with warmth, with alarm. Then her gaze dropped to Sarah, my attorney. Mom's face went even paler. She hesitated in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to come in or run. Emily, she said softly, like she was testing the word. Mom, I replied. I didn't stand. I didn't move. I didn't offer comfort. She took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from me as she could get, and stared down at her hands. The silence stretched. Then the door opened again, and Lily swept in like she was walking into her own coronation. She was dressed in an expensive suit I'd never seen before, tailored, sharp, the kind of outfit designed to make people assume power. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, her smile practically glowing. If my mother looked like someone walking into a storm, Lily looked like someone walking into a victory party. And she wasn't alone. Behind her was a man in a crisp suit with the kind of face you saw on billboards, sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. The kind of attorney who didn't specialize in peaceful estate planning, the kind who specialized in tearing families apart. Lily saw me, and her smile widened. Then she noticed Sarah. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Surprise. Not fear. Not concern. Just irritation, like I'd ruined her perfect photo. Well, she said, sliding into a chair across from me. You brought backup. I didn't answer. Sarah didn't answer. Lily's eyes darted to Mom. Mom wouldn't meet her gaze. And that told me everything. Lily had expected me to come alone. She had expected me to sit there quietly while she played the role of the rightful heir. She had expected my mother to sit beside her, nodding, supportive, obedient, but now the room looked different. Now the board had changed. 5 minutes later, Mr. Harrison entered. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, dignified, the kind of man who spoke carefully because his words had weight. He had been part of my family's life for as long as I could remember. He had attended company dinners. He had shaken my father's hand at events. He had been there when legal decisions shaped our lives. Today, he looked different. Not sad, not sympathetic. Resolved. He carried a thick folder, placed it at the center of the table, and sat down slowly. His gaze moved across the room, pausing briefly on me, then on Lily, then on my mother. Before he spoke, he took a breath. Before we begin, he said, his voice calm but firm, I want to note that Mr. Carter gave me very specific instructions regarding how this reading should be conducted. Lily's smile faltered slightly. Mr. Harrison continued. He anticipated certain challenges to his final wishes, and he prepared accordingly. Everything I am about to share was arranged by your father during the final months of his life, with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising. The room went still. I felt Sarah shift slightly beside me, her posture attentive. Lily's attorney leaned in, eyes narrowing. My mother's hands began to tremble, and in that moment, I realized something that sent a slow chill through my chest. This wasn't just a will reading, this was a trap. But it wasn't Lily's trap. It was my father's. Mr. Harrison opened the folder. The paper made a soft sound as he turned the first page. And then he began to read. I, Robert James Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Because somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear and the anger and the exhaustion of a lifetime spent being treated like an outsider, a new thought rose quietly to the surface. Maybe, just maybe, my father had known exactly what Lily was planning, and maybe he had been waiting for the perfect moment to stop her, right in front of all of us, all at once. Mr. Harrison's voice was steady as he read, the kind of calm that didn't come from lack of emotion, but from long practice. The words flowed like formal music, legal language, precise and cold, yet every sentence landed in that room like a stone thrown through glass. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap the way Sarah had told me to. But inside, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Lily, on the other hand, couldn't sit still if her life depended on it. Her knee bounced beneath the table, her fingers tapped the wood. She kept glancing at her attorney like a child waiting for permission to speak. And my mother looked like she was about to break apart. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, then continued. I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, my investment portfolio, and my ownership stake in Carter Industries. He paused, just long enough for the weight of the numbers to settle. To Emily Carter. For a moment, the room didn't react. It was as if none of us had enough oxygen to move. Then, Lily exploded. She shot up from her chair so fast it scraped the floor with a violent screech. Her face flushed bright red, and her voice cracked with rage before she even finished her first sentence. "This is exactly what I expected!" she shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "She's not his real daughter! We have DNA proof!" She admitted it herself. She took the test. She has no legal claim to any of this. Her words came out in a frantic rush, like she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror, like she'd been waiting months to deliver this speech. And that's when I realized something that made my skin prickle. Lily wasn't shocked by the will. She was prepared for it. She expected Dad to leave me something, but she believed she had the one thing that could destroy it. Din-ah. She believed that once the results were out, she could stand up in that room and invalidate my father's wishes with a single sentence. And the way she looked at me, triumphant, gleaming, hungry, told me she thought she'd already won. Mr. Harrison didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply waited for Lily to run out of breath, then continued reading with the same infuriating calm. The will states, and I quote directly, he lifted the page slightly, as if to emphasize that he wasn't improvising. He was delivering something written, deliberate, permanent. I have known since Emily was 2 years old that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway, and I choose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. The air left the room. It was so sudden, so complete, it felt like the walls shifted. I heard my mother make a small sound, half sob, half gasp. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lily froze. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost frightening. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes flicked back and forth, scanning the room as if she expected someone to jump up and call it a lie. Her attorney's expression changed, too. He leaned forward, reading over Mr. Harrison's shoulder, his jaw tightening with each word. Because in one paragraph, my father had dismantled Lily's entire strategy. He had acknowledged the DNA issue in the will itself. He had eliminated the argument before it could be used. He had done the one thing Lily hadn't accounted for. He had known, all along. My chest tightened, and I had to swallow hard to keep my face neutral. I wanted to cry. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and scream. But mostly, I wanted to go back in time and tell the little girl I used to be sitting quietly at family dinners, wondering why she was never enough, that none of it had been because she was unlovable. It had been because adults around her were carrying secrets too heavy to hold. Mr. Harrison continued. This decision, he read, was made with full knowledge of Emily's parentage and requires no further validation. Lily's attorney shifted uncomfortably. He leaned close to her and whispered something, but she jerked her arm away like a woman refusing to hear reality. No, she snapped, her voice suddenly shrill. This can't be right. He was manipulated. She manipulated him. She's been planning this. I almost laughed again, because the irony was suffocating. Lily had been the one planning. Lily had been the one manipulating. But she couldn't imagine anyone else doing what she did, because in her world, everything was a game, and everyone was a threat. Mr. Harrison didn't stop. He turned another page. And there is more, he said, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. He reached into the folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound with a rubber band. He placed them on the table with a deliberate thud. 8 months before his death, he continued, Mr. Carter hired a private investigator. The room went silent again. But this time, it wasn't shock. It was dread. I felt Sarah's hand brush lightly against my wrist beneath the table. A subtle reassurance. Stay calm. Watch. Mr. Harrison looked directly at Lily as he spoke. He did so after Lily began pressuring him to modify his will in her favor. The investigator was instructed to document any activities that might indicate an attempt to manipulate the estate distribution. Lily's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mr. Harrison slid the documents across the table toward her. She didn't touch them. She stared at them like they were poisonous. The report contains the following findings, he continued, and each word sounded like a hammer. Consultations with 3 separate estate litigation attorneys beginning 7 months before Mr. Carter's death. Lily's attorney stiffened. Unauthorized withdrawals, totaling $50,000 from Mr. Carter's personal accounts during the period of his illness. My mother let out a broken sob. Lily's face went gray. Multiple conversations with family friends regarding, and I quote from the transcripts, upcoming changes to the family situation and making sure the right people get what they deserve. I felt my stomach twist, because those were Lily's words. The same ones she had used with me. She had been saying them to other people too, broadcasting her plans, like she was so certain she couldn't be stopped. Mr. Harrison turned another page. And finally, he said, his voice colder now, the investigator documented the purchase of a DNA testing kit bought online 3 weeks before Emily's birthday. It was shipped to Lily's home address and gift-wrapped for presentation at a family dinner. Lily's attorney slowly closed his folder. His face was tight with embarrassment. He leaned toward Lily again, whispering urgently this time. I caught fragments. This is bad. Premeditated. Documented. Stop talking. But Lily wasn't listening. She was staring at the stack of papers like her mind couldn't process the fact that her own father had been watching her, that he had seen her, that he had understood exactly what she was. Mr. Harrison reached into the folder one last time and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. I recognized the slant of the letters instantly. My father's handwriting. He held it carefully, like it mattered more than the legal documents. Mr. Mester. Carter asked that I read this aloud, Mr. Harrison said. My throat tightened. Lily's breathing turned shallow. Mr. Harrison began. Lily, I knew what you were planning. I watched you scheme and manipulate for months, hoping you would change course. I gave you every opportunity to choose differently. You did not. These consequences are of your own making. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lily's attorney looked stunned, like he had just realized he'd been hired by someone walking into a trap with her eyes wide open. Lily's lips moved, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to my mother, desperate, accusing. My mother stared down at the table, shaking. And I realized then that my father hadn't just been protecting me. He had been exposing them. All of them. Lily found her voice again, but it sounded thin, desperate. Nothing like the confident woman who had walked into the room. I'm contesting this will, she said, forcing the words out. This is obviously wrong. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was sick. She influenced him. Her attorney grabbed her arm, his grip firm now, and whispered something that sounded like a warning, not advice. Lily shook him off again. Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. The will contains a no-contest clause, he said evenly. valid under California law. Any heir who files a challenge without probable cause forfeits their entire inheritance. Lily blinked, as if she didn't understand the words. Mr. Harrison continued. Given that the will explicitly acknowledges Emily's parentage and provides documented reasoning for Mr. Carter's decisions, any challenge on grounds of fraud or undue influence would almost certainly be deemed frivolous. He paused, letting that sink in. And additionally, he said, your outstanding loans from Mr. Carter, totaling $200,000, are documented as advances on your inheritance. If you forfeit your inheritance through a frivolous challenge, these advances convert to personal debts owed to the estate. Lily's face collapsed. It was as if someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Her attorney was already gathering his papers, his expression tight and resigned, like he wanted to vanish. For the first time in my life, I watched Lily lose control of a room, and it wasn't because I yelled louder. It wasn't because I fought dirtier. It was because my father, the man I had spent my whole life trying to earn love from, had seen the truth, and he had chosen me anyway. I sat there, still silent, my hands still folded, my face still calm. But inside, something in me shifted. Something healed, not completely, not magically, but enough. Enough to feel the first crack of light in a life that had been lived in shadow. And just as I thought it was over, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again. There is one additional matter, he said, reaching for a final envelope at the bottom of the folder. My heartbeat stumbled. He held it up. This pertains to an agreement made 35 years ago, he said. An agreement that involves Emily's biological father. I was instructed to share this only after the primary will reading was complete. The room went cold. Lily's eyes widened. My mother made a sound like she was going to faint. And I sat there, staring at that envelope, realizing the truth I'd uncovered was only the beginning. Whatever was inside was about to change everything I thought I knew about who I really was. The weeks after the will reading should have felt like relief. In a normal family, that meeting would have been the end. The truth exposed, the intentions made clear, the manipulator defeated, everyone forced to accept reality. But my family wasn't normal. In my family, losing didn't make Lily stop. It made her escalate. For the first few days, she went quiet. No calls, no messages, no public tantrums. And I made the mistake of thinking, maybe, just maybe, the humiliation of being exposed in front of her attorney, my mother, and my father's lifelong lawyer had finally reached her. Then, 3 days later, I received an email from Sarah. Lily has officially filed a will contest. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. After everything. After the private investigator's report. After the handwritten letter from Dad. After Mr. Harrison had explained the no contest clause in slow, clear terms. After her own attorney had practically begged her to stop. She still filed. Not because she believed she could win. Because Lily couldn't tolerate not being in control. Her contest claimed undue influence. Manipulation. That I had somehow coerced a dying man into rewriting his will. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so vicious. Because the irony was unbearable, Lily accusing me of manipulation when my father had documented her scheming for months. But in Lily's world, the truth didn't matter. Only the story she could sell. Sarah called me that evening. Her voice was calm, but firm. She's doing exactly what we expected, she said. Don't engage. Don't respond to her directly. Let the process work. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe the law would be enough. But Lily wasn't just fighting in court. She was fighting everywhere. The first time she showed up at my apartment, it was late afternoon on a Saturday. I was in sweatpants, cleaning my kitchen, trying to reclaim a sense of normal life, when I heard pounding on my door. Not a polite knock. A violent, furious pounding. I froze. Then I heard her voice through the door, sharp and shrill, echoing down the hallway. Open up, Emily. I know you're in there. My heart slammed against my ribs. I walked to the door but didn't open it. I looked through the peephole. Lily stood there, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes wild, face flushed with rage. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had walked into the law office in her designer suit. She looked like someone unraveling. You think you won? She screamed. You think you can steal everything and just hide behind lawyers? She slammed her fist against the door again, and the sound vibrated through the frame. You're a fraud, she shouted. You're not even a Carter. Everyone is going to know what you are. My neighbor's doors cracked open slightly. I could see movement in the hallway. Lily didn't care. She wanted an audience. She wanted to humiliate me again, but this time in front of strangers. I felt my hands shaking, but I kept my voice steady through the door. Leave, Lily, now, she laughed, high and bitter. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead, tell them your own sister is here. Tell them you stole your father's estate. I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. My building had installed security cameras 2 years earlier. Clear signs on every floor, recording in progress. And Lily, in her rage, hadn't noticed any of it. She kept screaming. She threatened my job. She threatened to contact my company and expose me. She threatened to ruin my reputation, to make sure I never knew peace again. And all of it was captured in high-definition video with audio. When she finally stormed off, I stood in my silent hallway, my heart pounding, my body trembling not from fear of her, but from the sick realization that she would never stop unless she was forced. That night, I forwarded the security footage to Sarah. Her reply came an hour later. Good, we'll use this. 6 weeks later, we were back in a courtroom not for a dramatic trial, but for mandatory mediation. Still, it felt like stepping into another arena. The air was stale, the walls too white, the kind of place where people's lives were reduced to documents and arguments. Lily arrived with a new attorney, not the billboard one. That man had vanished the day after the will reading, likely realizing he'd been hired by a client who was both reckless and doomed. This new attorney looked cheaper, less confident, like someone who had taken the case because Lily was willing to pay up front. Lily herself looked different. Still angry, still sharp, but the glow of victory was gone. She was wearing a suit, but it didn't fit as perfectly as before. Her makeup was heavier, like she was trying to paint strength over exhaustion. Her eyes never stopped moving. She sat down and glared at me, as if her stare could rewrite reality. Sarah sat beside me, calm as ever, her folder neatly organized. When the mediator began, Lily's attorney launched into their argument, claims that my father had been manipulated, that he had been ill, that he wasn't in his right mind. They tried to paint me as some quiet predator who had swooped in at the end to steal everything. I sat there listening, and for a moment, I felt that old familiar ache, the one that came from being misunderstood, from being judged without being known, from having people decide what you were before you even opened your mouth. But then Sarah began, and the ache turned into something else. Vindication. She didn't argue emotionally. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the facts like a spreadsheet, each piece of evidence a number that couldn't be denied. First, she presented the private investigator's report. She highlighted the timeline. Lily's meetings with estate attorneys 7 months before my father died. The conversations with family friends about upcoming changes. The documented pressure she put on my father while he was sick. Then she presented the bank records. The unauthorized withdrawals totaling $50,000 during the months my father was too weak to monitor his accounts. Lily's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Lily's face tightened, but she stayed silent. Then Sarah played the security footage from my apartment. Lily, screaming, threatening, calling me a fraud, promising to ruin my life. The mediator's expression changed. He looked at Lily, the way people look at someone who has revealed their true self without realizing it. Sarah didn't stop. She showed the text messages Lily had sent after the will, reading dozens of them. Some furious, some pleading, some shifting between apology and accusation in the span of minutes. A pattern. Not grief. Not heartbreak. Harassment. Lily's attorney tried to interrupt, but Sarah raised a hand politely and continued. Finally, she addressed the DNA issue. She held up a copy of the will, turned to the paragraph where my father explicitly acknowledged my parentage, and read it aloud. The deceased made his wishes with full knowledge of all relevant facts. There was no fraud to uncover. Because nothing had been hidden, Lily's attorney attempted one last argument that biology mattered, that blood mattered, that I had no rightful claim. And that was when the judge who had been quietly observing finally spoke. Her voice was firm, and the distaste in it was unmistakable. The will explicitly acknowledges the petitioner's parentage. The test results are irrelevant. This contest lacks probable cause. She didn't just dismiss Lily's claim. She labeled it what it was: frivolous. And then she invoked the no contest clause. Lily forfeited her remaining inheritance. In one ruling, in one calm, decisive moment, everything Lily had built her life around collapsed. The 30% she still had? Gone. The $200,000 in documented loans? Converted to personal debt owed to the estate. The $50,000 withdrawals? No longer hidden under family silence. I watched Lily's face as the judge spoke. At first, she didn't react, like her brain couldn't process it. Then her mouth opened slightly, and her eyes widened not with anger, but with disbelief. And for the briefest moment, I saw something under all that entitlement. Fear. The fear of a person realizing they are not special. They are not protected. They are not untouchable. Then it was gone. Her face hardened into fury again, and she stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. "This is a joke," she spat, glaring at me like she wanted to burn a hole through my skull. "You're all blind." She stormed out without another word. Her attorney didn't even follow immediately. He sat there for a second, looking exhausted, then quietly gathered his papers and left, like a man escaping a sinking ship. When it was over, I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel satisfaction, but what I felt was quiet, like a door had finally closed. Not because I had slammed it, because the law had. Outside the courthouse, Sarah turned to me. "You did well," she said simply. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "I didn't do anything," I whispered. Sarah's gaze softened. "Exactly. That's why you won." That evening, my mother came to my apartment. Not Lily. Not an attorney. Just my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the years had finally caught up with her all at once. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She sat on my couch with a cup of tea she didn't drink, hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her from shaking apart. And then, finally, after 35 years of silence, she told me the truth. Richard Hayes wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a random investor. He was my father's closest friend, his college roommate, the best man at my parents' wedding. When my parents discovered my father was infertile, their marriage nearly broke. My mother wanted children desperately. My father felt like a failure. They separated for almost a year. And during that separation, my mother found comfort in the one person who understood them both, Richard. When she became pregnant, the three of them made a decision together. Richard would step back completely. My father would raise me as his daughter, give me his name, protect me, and Richard would save Carter Industries, providing the capital my father needed to keep the company alive. 2 attorneys witnessed and documented the agreement. One of them was Mr. Harrison. As my mother spoke, her voice shaking, I felt something inside me settle. Not forgiveness, not warmth, but understanding. The secret wasn't just about shame. It was about survival. A marriage saved. A business rescued. A child given a name. But the cost of that survival had been my childhood. My mother wept as she admitted Lily discovered the secret at 16. And from that moment on, Lily had used it like a leash. Every gift, every loan, every favor. Not love, payment, bribe, fear. When she finished, she looked at me like she expected comfort, like she expected me to say, "It's okay." I didn't. I stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I need time." And I meant it, because even though the court had ended Lily's war, the truth had just begun to rewrite my entire life. And somewhere in the middle of all that wreckage, one question still burned in my chest. If Richard Hayes was my biological father, why had he never come for me? Why had he stayed away for 35 years? I didn't know the answer yet, but I was about to, because the next day, Mr. Harrison called, and his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. "Emily," he said, There is one final piece to this, something your father and Richard Hayes arranged long ago. My fingers tightened around the phone. What is it? I whispered. He paused. Then he said, a trust, in your name. And in that moment, I realized the inheritance Lily had been chasing wasn't the only thing waiting for me. There was something else. Something older. Something hidden. Something that had been prepared for me long before I ever knew I needed it. When Mr. Harrison told me there was a trust in my name, my first reaction wasn't excitement. It was suspicion, because by then, I had learned the hard way that in my family, money never came without strings. Gifts were leverage. Help was a transaction. Love, if it existed at all, was conditional. So when he said the words, a trust, in your name, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I was standing on the edge of another trap. Mr. Harrison asked me to come to his office the following afternoon. I brought Sarah, even though part of me wanted to go alone. A stubborn part of me still wanted to prove I could handle things by myself. But another part, the wiser part, remembered what it felt like to sit at a family dinner while people laughed at my humiliation. I wasn't doing anything alone anymore. When we arrived, Mr. Harrison was waiting with a second folder, thinner than the will packet but somehow heavier in meaning. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before, like a man who had carried a secret for decades and was finally allowed to set it down. He didn't waste time with small talk. 35 years ago, he said, your parents and Richard Hayes signed an agreement. 2 attorneys witnessed it. I was one of them. He slid a document across the table. It wasn't dramatic. It was typed, formal. The kind of paper that could sit in a file cabinet for decades and still hold the power to reshape a life. The agreement stated that Richard Hayes would never interfere in my upbringing. He would never claim me publicly. He would never contact me directly. In exchange, my father would raise me as his daughter, give me his name, and protect me from scandal that could destroy both the marriage and the business. And then came the part that made my breath catch. Richard Hayes had created a trust fund in my name. Not as an apology, not as a bribe, as a promise. The trust had been designed with 2 trigger conditions. It would activate only if the truth ever surfaced in a legal way, either through a formal acknowledgement of my parentage in court proceedings, or through my father explicitly referencing it in his will. My father's will had done exactly that. The moment Mr. Harrison read that paragraph aloud, the trust had been automatically activated. Richard's attorney had been notified. The funds were released. Richard Hayes had been dead for 5 years. But he had prepared this for me anyway. I sat there, staring at the document, my mind struggling to catch up. So he planned this? I whispered. Mr. Harrison nodded. He planned it long ago, and he added to it regularly over the years. I felt my throat tighten. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Because it meant something I wasn't ready to process. It meant that while I was growing up feeling invisible, someone had been watching. Not interfering, not saving me, but watching, knowing, caring. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and handed me another envelope. This was delivered by Richard's attorney, he said. It contains the trust documentation and a letter. The envelope was thick, heavy, sealed. My hands shook as I took it. I didn't open it in the office. I couldn't. Some part of me still didn't trust that good things could be real. I drove home in silence, Sarah beside me. She didn't push. She didn't ask questions. She just let me have the quiet. When I got home, I set the envelope on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The sunlight through the window was soft, warm, ordinary. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. And yet, it felt like the air was charged. Like the past was holding its breath. I finally sat down, slid my finger under the flap, and opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents, neatly organized, and beneath them, a handwritten letter on thick cream-colored paper. The handwriting wasn't my father's. It was unfamiliar, but something about it felt steady. I unfolded the letter, and I read it alone. Richard wrote that he could not be my father in life because he had made a promise, one he intended to keep even when it hurt. He wrote that he had loved my mother once, but that love had never been worth destroying the life my father wanted to give me. He wrote that my father was not a weak man for raising a child that wasn't biologically his. He wrote that my father was the strongest man he had ever known. Then came the sentence that shattered me. I watched you from afar, Emily. I felt my eyes burn instantly. He wrote about my graduations, my career, the way I kept my head down and worked harder than anyone expected, the way I survived in a family that often treated me like an inconvenience. He wrote that he had attended some of my milestones from the back of the room and left before anyone could notice him. He wrote that he wanted to reach out 1,000 times, but he never did, because he had promised, and because, in his words, I believed you deserved a family more than I deserved the comfort of being near you. By the time I finished the letter, tears were sliding down my face so steadily they dripped onto the paper. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. I just sat there and cried quietly, like someone who had been thirsty her whole life and finally tasted water. For 35 years, I had believed something was wrong with me. I had believed I was inherently less lovable, less worthy, less important. But the letter proved something else. I had never been unworthy. I had simply been surrounded by people who were too broken, too selfish, too afraid to love me properly. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, trust transfers, estate management, meetings with accountants, calls with Carter Industries board members, my father's shares, my father's home. For the first time in my life, I had resources, real resources, the kind that could change everything. And I realized something that surprised me. I didn't want revenge. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where you destroy someone and celebrate their ruin. I wanted peace. But peace required boundaries. And boundaries required consequences. I reviewed the estate's financial records personally. I didn't have to. I could have hired someone, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know exactly what had been taken from my father while he was dying. It didn't take long to find it. The $50,000 withdrawals. The timing was damning. The pattern was clear. Lily had taken advantage of my father's illness. Under the law, it could have been pursued aggressively. Sarah explained my options carefully. She didn't push me toward punishment. She laid out the reality. I sat with it for a long time. Part of me wanted to press charges immediately. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. Lily had terrorized me for years, and she had stolen from a sick man. But another part of me, one I didn't even realize existed, didn't want to spend the next year of my life consumed by her. I didn't want my future to be built on her downfall. So I chose a different path. Through Sarah, I offered Lily a choice. Repay the $50,000 within 1 year, or I would pursue the strongest legal remedy available. No screaming, no threats. Just a clear boundary. A consequence. Lily responded with rage, of course. Emails, voicemails, messages sent through mutual acquaintances. She swung wildly between begging and blaming, like a drowning person trying to drag someone else under. I didn't respond. For my mother, I made a different decision. I didn't cut her off completely, but I didn't rescue her either. I arranged a modest monthly allowance from the estate, enough to cover her basic needs, not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to while living in denial. She would have to downsize. She would have to adjust. She would have to live with the reality that she had spent decades feeding Lily's entitlement while starving me of love. This wasn't forgiveness. It was balance. Then came the house. The Carter family home, sold within weeks. I didn't attend the walkthrough. I didn't want to see those rooms again. Too many memories lived there, and none of them were warm. I hired professionals to pack up what remained and donate most of it. I kept only a few items, my father's old watch tools, a box of his letters, and the photograph of me as a baby. Everything else felt like dead weight. With the money from the estate and the trust, I could have bought anything. A penthouse, a mansion, a luxury condo in the city. But those things had always mattered to Lily, not to me. So I bought something small, a cottage. Old, slightly worn around the edges, with a neglected garden that reminded me of myself, full of potential, waiting to be cared for. The first night I slept there, the silence was so deep it felt unreal. No tension. No judgment. No waiting for someone to insult me. Just peace. I filled the cottage with books I'd always wanted to read. I learned to garden, killing a few plants at first and laughing at myself instead of hearing Lily's voice in my head mocking me. I painted the walls colors I loved, not colors that looked expensive. And slowly, something incredible happened. I started to like who I was. Not the version of me that tried to earn love. The version of me that existed when no one was measuring my worth. 3 months passed before I opened the wooden box that had come with Richard's package. It had been sitting on my nightstand, untouched, like a sacred thing. On a quiet Sunday morning, coffee cooling on the counter, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, I finally lifted the lid. Inside was a watch. Old, worn, simple, and beneath it, a folded note. I unfolded it carefully. I wore this every day, Emily. Every time I checked it, I thought of you. He wrote that it counted every hour he wished he could have spent with me, every birthday he wanted to call, every graduation he attended from the back row, every moment he saw me hurting and had to walk away. Then, the final line. Now let it count the hours of the life you deserve. I pressed the watch to my chest and cried. Not because I was broken, because I was finally whole. That watch didn't feel like money. It felt like love. The kind I had waited for my entire life without knowing it existed. I put it on that morning, and I haven't taken it off since. Lily had given me a DNA test to prove I didn't belong. But in the end, it proved something she never expected. Two fathers, one who raised me, one who watched from afar, had both chosen me when they didn't have to. And the greatest inheritance wasn't the estate, or the trust, or the house. It was the truth. I was never another man's mistake. I was a choice. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself back. Some stories don't hit you because they're dramatic. They hit you because they're familiar. Emily's story isn't just about a DNA test or an inheritance. It's about what it feels like to grow up invisible in your own family, to spend years wondering why love always seemed easier for everyone else. And the most powerful twist isn't even the money, it's the truth. The people who hurt you the most often think they're untouchable, until consequences finally catch up. Lily didn't lose because Emily became cruel. She lost because Emily stopped shrinking, stopped staying silent, and stopped protecting people from the results of their own choices. This story reminds us of something we all need to hear. Your worth is not defined by how your family treats you. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone, it's building a life so peaceful that their chaos can no longer reach you. If this story stayed in your heart, if you've ever been the overlooked child, the scapegoat, or the one who had to be strong too early, please know you're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, stories of justice, healing, and quiet victory, make sure to subscribe to Hanji Wie Iyagi. Your support helps this channel grow, and your story matters too.